Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the next session where we will be showing you what Leslie called the role of the university as a neutral space. This is the disruptive session where we will be having some active audience participation. And I will explain in a moment what I mean by that. Let me welcome onto stage my panel for this next session, and I will promptly move myself over there since I'm moderating it. Please, Gordana and Andy. And in case you're wondering about the empty two chairs are there to symbolize the audience participation in this exercise. Thank you very much. Please sit down. So, ladies and gentlemen, it is my great pleasure to welcome to this conversation Ms. Gordana Slepcev, who is the COO of Anaconda Mining. I believe you have heard her speak already yesterday. She's a great speaker. We will have wonderful things to hear from her today. I'm also very excited to present to you a real-life practicing lawyer, since there were some people who were happy to hear yesterday that I was a lawyer. And I then had to tell you that I'm not practicing. So we have Mr. Andy Lillie. Sorry, Andy. Mr. Andy Lillie, who's a senior partner at Hogan Lovells. And they are very famous and very big firm in the mineral resource domain. Specifically regarding mining, he's an expert in this area. We are going to have a very great conversation regarding sustainability. I thought that we would involve the audience in this specific conversation because this is something that really touches all of us. And I think that you've had a long time now of sitting and listening to people. So I would like to turn this conversation a little on its head, and I would like to pose the questions to the audience and then have the speakers respond, if my speakers are in agreement. My speakers seem to be in agreement.
That's fantastic.
Yes, fantastic.
So they are good sports. Ladies and gentlemen, our first topic here has to do with tension points. So we heard in our previous speaker panel, they were talking about cultural transformation. We had the reference by AFSAL to different strategies that they needed to undertake in Vale subsequent to the unfortunate dam collapse. I was wondering what you have to say on the topic of environmental pressure points from your perspective. Anybody want to? We have two people with microphones, so you can simply, could we maybe raise the lights a little on the audience? Thank you very much. We have two people with microphones, so if you could just give us an indication, anybody who wants to contribute on the topic of environmental pressure points that you are experiencing. Otherwise, we can start the conversation on this end. No? I was thinking that you must really be tired of listening and wanting to participate somewhat actively. But I will spare you the strategies that I normally have on my students, which consists of things like saying, are you guys awake? Do you need some coffee? Okay, we won't go that route. Right, so let me start then by asking Andy. Andy, if we talk about, say, mine closures, what would you say are particular tension points that arise in that regard?
Sure, it's a great question. First of all, thank you for having me. Thank you for having us here and allowing us to speak with you. I've been out there at so many conferences. Half of you are looking at your phones. Half of you are paying attention. It's cool. You can do your thing. But we really do want some participation to the extent we can get it. I won't do what they did to me, my professors did to me in law school, which is literally pick on people and have them stand up and ask questions, and then they wouldn't let us sit down until they're satisfied. I won't do that. And I don't think you will either, Elizabeth. But to answer your question, so mine closure is an interesting topic that I've been looking at for the past few years, along with my clients. And this sort of goes back to what we heard up here just a few minutes ago. So much of what mine companies are dealing with now today has to do with more of the soft sciences, the social psychology of sort of being in the mining business and really understanding what it means to be a community player who hopefully has earned the right and the social license to operate. So there's this idea, and many of you have heard of it, many of you have probably thought about it in detail, that when you're looking at a mine, especially a new mine or a reinvigorated mine plan, you have to think about the life cycle of that mine. You have to think about not only sort of what it's going to look like when you start doing your permitting at the front end and your exploration processes, but also you have to think about what happens when we leave. What happens to this community? What happens to the folks who we have invested in, who have invested in us, the community itself, the schools, the businesses we've propped up, the local government? All of these stakeholders actually mean something. And I do a lot of dispute resolution, and it turns out most disputes, and I'll tell you this, I think it's a little bit of inside baseball, but not really for those of you who have been in litigation. A lot of it's driven by emotion. It's not driven necessarily by dollars and cents. And so the idea of investing in not only trust, which is something that's been talked about a lot, I think, here at the conference so far, but in the idea that you actually care for the community in which you operate and actually care about the environment, not simply to greenwash, not simply to say you're doing it, to hope that your investors think highly of you, but to really think about it carefully, means that you're going to have a very comfortable relationship that otherwise could be very uncomfortable moving forward. And disputes tend not to happen when good players, those with the social license, those with a sense of the investment in good faith, actually approach their mining operations this way. It all sounds a little soft to a lot of mining companies. Where's the money? Where's the bottom line? Why would my investors care? I'll tell you, more and more often, people like me who look at this and get to see risk played out on big stages where litigation happens, say to themselves, man, if someone had just gone to that meeting and spoken truthfully to the folks who had concerns, if someone had simply been open and honest about the life of the mine and what might happen or what might not happen, a lot of this could have gone away. So this goes to sort of this whole life cycle analysis, thinking about not only being there and doing your work, extracting the resource and doing the best you can to do that, but doing it in a way that thinks even beyond when you're going to be gone.
Thank you very much, Andy. I think that goes back to what Afzal and also Leslie was saying about transparent communication and conversation with communities. I was wondering in this regard, Gordana, you've just gone through an environmental sustainability process with, I think, the Goldboro
project, yes.
Do you want to tell us a little more about the different aspects that you encountered there?
Yeah, so as many mentioned yesterday and today and the panel before, it's really, really important that you start engaging local communities, government, First Nation as soon as possible. As soon as you plan for the drill target somewhere there, just talk about the project and opportunities. And keep those conversations open and keep them coming. Do it very, very often. Create these, community engagement committees or, other groups that actually can, talk on your behalf because, as you start the projects you're drilling, you're not always necessarily there, but liaise with the community, provide information, send your news releases, send some information that people usually wouldn't see. So at least you have somebody, you have people on your behalf in the community. So they keep talking about your plans, what you plan to do, what are kind of timelines, because most of the people at the end of the day in the local communities, they're going to be looking, asking, well, when is the shovel going to hit the ground? When you're going to start constructing? And those are the good questions from the local communities. Good question is what's going to happen with the air? Is the noise going to be increased? Am I going to be able to sleep? Is the dust going to be there? What's going to happen with the water? Are you going to kill the fish? Those are all the questions that people have right to ask, and we have to be able to provide answers that, yes, we're going to try to minimize the impact, we're going to design the best possible footprint, because at the end of the day, as Andy mentioned, you have to close that project one day, even though we don't like to think about it as something that's finite. unfortunately, the resources are finite. Like, we have to close at some time. We may extend or, get some other projects that are in proximity. We can track hours, that kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, most of these mines will have to close, and we have to have very good plans when we start that project, even before the construction, how are we going to do it. And the good thing is to actually ask all these people, what would they want? What would they want? I mean, there are some good examples of, past mines that have turned into golf courses.
Yeah.
Is that something that retiring community is going to want? Because that's what mostly happens in all these mining towns. Once the miners leave, if that's the main industry, retired community comes back because houses are cheap, infrastructure is good, because in the good times you usually would build your roads, hospitals, general supplies. So retired people move there. Is that something that community wants? Do you want to reforest the area because local communities appreciate, hunting and, gathering the berries, or it depends on the areas. Hunting is really big in Canada, So, ask people, and they're going to provide answers, and they would feel that respect and trust because you've been there, you talk with them. Don't send consultants, This is advice to the mining companies. I apologize to all consultants, but be there, be the face, shake the hands, talk with people, because really everybody appreciates that, being there and being, speaking, showing up, hearing them. That's the big thing. We talk a little bit here, and we talk, but hear people, Take that into account.
Thank you, Gordana. I think maybe that's a very important thing, not trying to anticipate what the community wants, but actually asking them.
That's right.
Andy?
No, I can't agree more. I do work in the oil and gas industry as well. And here in Colorado, for those of you who are familiar with what has happened in the past, say, 10 years or so, my clients, my oil and gas clients who are very good about communicating with the community, asking questions, listening carefully, and then attempting to address those questions in an honest way, they frankly don't get sued very much. The ones who don't, who sort of keep to themselves, who aren't honest, who don't like sharing the details, who don't want to talk about 10 years down the road or 15 years down the road what's going to happen, what they're doing is they're putting themselves in a position where the risk goes up. I like to think of it, and I often talk to my clients about what happens with physicians, right? For those of you who know docs, at least in the United States, insurance companies tell the doctors, hey, listen, if you screw up, the first thing you do upon your patient waking up from anesthesia is you tell that person you screwed up, you apologize, you say, here's what's happened, here's what I'm going to do to fix it. It's a big ego blow a lot of the time. It's very difficult to get over this hump. Once you do that, though, the chances of getting sued go way down. It's exactly the same theory here, being open, honest, and frankly, talking about things that are uncomfortable. We heard some folks talk about cybersecurity up here. That's something I also deal with. People don't like talking about it, especially in the energy industry, which is bizarre to me because infrastructure risks are gigantic when it comes to cyber. All sorts of these uncomfortable things. Ooh, maybe we don't want to talk about it because it makes us uncomfortable. Guess what? If you start talking honestly about those things to your constituents, you're going to be much more accepted and much less exposed to risk of all kinds.
Well, and something to add up too. Well, say honestly if you don't know. Yes. People understand that and say, well, this is perhaps things we're looking at. Yeah. Those are options. What would you think about? What would you suggest? Because everybody's very knowledgeable nowadays. People have very good ideas what they want.
I think yesterday in the panel on risk, we mentioned humanizing the different aspects. And this is one way of humanizing it, reaching out to people and saying, well, I don't know.
I don't know.
What do you suggest? So that's an excellent suggestion. Andy, I'm so happy to hear another lawyer say, talk to people, be transparent. Yeah. Because I had a question about that yesterday in the sense of lawyers wanting not to have transparency. And my gut reaction was, there are two kinds of lawyers.
Yeah. No, transparency does all sorts of things because we're all human beings operating on a very human scale when it comes right down to it, right? Whether it's the folks who are out in the field doing the work, whether it's the folks back at headquarters in the C-suite. We're all humans interacting in human ways, and people either get along or they don't. And I mean, frankly, let's just be straight about it, right? Mining has a bad reputation. All right, I mean, maybe that's an old school thing. Maybe that's something that's been developed over a lot of years. Maybe it has to do with things that we hear about in the news, whether it's the Gold King mine here in Colorado, whether it's the Vale disaster, and I feel terrible for Vale. You know, those are the things that get us in the news, unfortunately. So how can we shift that? Because, I mean, I have a lot of associates who are young, who are in my group, who do, you know, natural resources work. Why do they do it? Because they think there's a future of mining. That's really interesting, right? In this world, where people are terrified of climate change, they're terrified of sort of, are we gonna have too many people on the planet? Is there enough energy? Is there enough food? We need mining more than ever now to provide technology, to provide all of the infrastructure that we have for everybody to the extent that we can. The only way we're gonna do it in a way that doesn't result in more catastrophes, more lawsuits, frankly, way too much lost time, energy, effort, and money fighting over things, is to be upfront and to be transparent. And to say, you know, we don't know everything, but we're trying, we're doing our best, and we do care about this stuff. We do care about this stuff in a real way.
And I think this is an important takeaway that I had from the conference last year, which I was very new to Western, the university where I teach at that stage. And I remember I went back to my class and I said to them, I have something very exciting to share with you guys. I went to this mining conference and I saw so much goodwill. I saw that on the whole, the industry, they're not the rotten apples. They're wanting to improve. They're trying. They're doing their best. It's not just a quest for money. And there was a light that went up for those students, and we saw it in the enrollment numbers this year. Last year, just so that you have an idea of how this works in our law faculty, we capped the elective courses for the seniors, the upper years, at 25 in a course. So in their first year, they must do certain mandatory courses, and then in their second and third year, they get to do electives, and they can choose between all the law courses. So normally, the natural resource courses are not the hot topics. In any case, last year, I had 17 students in my course. It was my first year there. It was the only natural resource related course. I spoke to them after this conference, and I announced to them that I was going to do a mining finance speaker series, which I did in winter. My mining finance speaker series was so oversubscribed, in other words, up to 25, I lifted the cap to 50. That cap filled within 3 hours. So we were up to over 50, and we had a wait list. Now, Western is a boutique law school. We have only 300 students in total doing law. It's a big university. We have something like 40,000 students, but the law school is boutique. We keep it small by choice. So for so many students wanting to do suddenly mining finance speaker series says something. What do we have this year? We have 6 courses. All of them are filled to capacity. Mining finance speaker series, natural resource and energy law, mining law sustainability, corporate social responsibility, it's in a mining context, international mining transactions, and there's another that I forget at the moment, but in any case, this is the 6th one. All of them, all 6, full to capacity. These people are interested, they want to go into this career, they've seen there's a future. And it's good feedback, it's interesting classes, it's interesting speakers, it's people who are passionate, people like Gordana who've come to talk to them, who share with them some industry experience. And this goes to my point really about the gap between industry and university not needing to be there, and not needing to be there in our teaching. Because it's by involving you guys, by you coming into our classrooms and talking to the students, and sharing with them what it is like out there, what your experiences are, that they can see it's an interesting career choice to make. Sorry, I'm supposed to be moderating, not talking.
No, that's fantastic. Is any of this ringing true with you? Are there any speakers? We'd love to have a conversation because sitting up here is
There's
fantastic.
There's a question. Yeah. Great.
You know, Andrew, you mentioned challenges 30 years ago were different, and they may not be the challenges in current time. So, in your experience, have you seen technology kind of being utilized to deal with environmental sustainability challenges? And now that more than ever before, you know, we are evolving, how has that taken an effect on sustainability? That's...
I can take that one. Drones been taking quite a bit over the industry nowadays, and there are really some good examples. I'm not going to advertise, but that can take, let's say, environmental samples. They would actually kind of flow over and take the samples from the tailings dams, from the water bodies, from the rivers, and you can get these samples analyzed. So it helps out with technology, but it goes back to kind of known ways of controlling and monitoring, like flow meters, taking water samples, taking baseline conditions. And you know, everybody knows the mining industry is very much regulated, so you have certain needs to collect certain samples every day, every week, every month, quarterly, yearly, and report on those. So basically all these new technologies that help out, you know, get that data faster, collected faster, and to the companies so they can actually compare and see if you are an exceedance, do you need to do something, you know, provide the means to actually review the data, assess, and ensure the compliance. All the mining projects have water treatment plants. Like, it's impossible even to build a project without water treatment plants to ensure that actually the water that you're releasing into the environment is cleaner, or at least at the same quality that the water you're taking in. And that's one of the big things that we don't maybe talk much on these kind of conferences, is how we actually can minimize, you know, that waste in the entire process. So one of the things is how we actually can reuse and recycle water. So don't discharge, keep that water in the cycle. As a professor from UFT mentioned, there are huge demands on the water in the mining process. So, you know, seeing how you actually, and most of the companies do this, they actually recycle the water and reuse. All the water that's been used in processing, let's say, they go through the process plant, they get discharged in the tailings, and then upon the settlement, they are again used in the process. So some of these things help out with technologies. The different technologies that actually maximize the value chain. Because the goal, as any other industry, is to go to the zero waste, which is really hard to achieve. But you know, any company can do some steps to actually get closer to there. Per se, you know, using the waste rock for construction, for aggregates. Why have another quarry 15 kilometers away if the rock is of the sufficient quality that could be used, you know, in the winter for the roads, gravel roads, you know, constructing the driveways, or even for the building construction, which is usually needed granite, but you know, could be repurposed further on. And then all these technologies that we use in the entire mining system, they actually help maximize the ore output and minimize dilution. You know, the big thing is the less ore you put through that processing plant, the less tailings you're going to create. Can we use some other technologies like drones and some of the, you know, let's say rock mass tools to actually minimize that dilution, or maybe make those walls steeper? Technology is there now for years to monitor tailings dam stability. You know, there are radars and the systems that companies use to monitor wall stability. So technology is big, and application of the technology is been taking well in the mining industry. We used to say that the mining industry is slow to adopt, but I wouldn't say so. We see some of the majors that have capital out there investing in autonomous vehicles. Yes. It's a big thing. We don't see autonomous cars on the streets yet. So, well, there's some areas that actually mining is ahead of the entire other
the
industries,
curve,
let's
yeah.
say it that way. But technology is very important. It's really important that we keep a track of it. It's hard though, because as everybody knows, by the time you kind of evaluate and say, I'm going to do this, implement that, you're kind of a little bit behind. So.
Do we have another question? We have several questions.
Sorry.
Thank you, Gordana.
So I'm going to link the last presentation with this presentation. And Andrew, you mentioned you work with both oil and gas and mining.
That's right.
So in the last presentation, it was mentioned that water was one of the big three issues. This is an environmental panel here. Well, water is obviously a massive issue in oil and gas with fracking. So I'm just wondering where you may have seen some collaboration between mining and oil and gas and the actual use of the water to get the ore out of the ground or get oil out of the ground rather than the recycling and the reusing of it. If you see collaboration between oil and gas and mining with the actual using of the water to do what it is that you're trying to do in the first place.
Yeah. So that's, I love the question. There's a lot of foresight there. I'll tell you, it's hard enough to get oil and gas companies to use water again and to reclaim it and to sort of keep it in a closed loop cycle. A lot of them have learned to do that, and they're making strides because obviously there are efficiencies there, and you save a lot of money, right? If you can use the water again. I have never seen a collaboration between an oil and gas company and a mining company. I would love to see more collaborations. But in the same way that mining companies don't often talk with one another, industry to industry, even in the natural resources world, where all of these companies are doing all of this really important work, in the extractive industries especially, where they share tons and tons of the same risks and the same issues, there's very few collaborations that I could even think of. Quite frankly, in the legal field where you have natural resources lawyers like myself, we tend to be able to be sort of, communicative about all of this stuff. But I've never been to a conference that was like the natural resources industry. It's always mining, or it's oil and gas, or it's, renewables. Whereas I think, 80, 90% of the stuff, whether it's water, because there are water issues in mining, water issues in oil and gas, whether it's, sort of the litigation piece. I mean, it's amazing to me how often solar projects get sued by the same people who are suing oil and gas folks, the same folks who are suing mining. There could be a whole lot more collaboration. There simply is not. I wish that were different. Why not? Because I don't think people know how to communicate with one another, and I think there's this real idea of what is proprietary versus what isn't, and I think there's a lot of sort of cautiousness and conservatism about, hey, we're in a world where capitalism is sort of thriving and drives everything we do, so we have to be careful about what we share, who we talk to. If we're being innovative, we don't necessarily want to tell someone else about it until we've succeeded at it and made money at it, etc. I think those are some of the barriers. I also think there simply aren't enough opportunities for folks to get in the same room.
And I think, we must own the traditional lawyer thing as well. Lawyers traditionally have been very prudent and have tended to warn against risk and against disclosure and against just telling anything against transparency. I think that's changed.
That's right.
And I think it's changing. But it also needs to change in the whole of the company culture. So that's a continuation of a discussion yesterday. Thank you so much, Andy.
Morning.
There's a
Right here.
Oh,
Risa
okay.
Fury from Stantec. I'm looking at the title of this session.
Yes.
And it reminds me of the CEO roundtable that recently came out, where they said that the role of a corporation is no longer just to be profitable. The corporations have a responsibility to society and to the environment. And I'm curious, first of all, what all of you think about that. And then secondly, do you think that we'll see mining move in that direction as well?
Well, can we have reaction from the floor? Because this really is a question for the floor.
That authentic commitment to sustainability and not greenwashing, as you said, has been key for us in trying to rapidly advance our environmental action. And so we spent a lot of time looking for an area of focus that would really align to our core businesses. And so we're working on reforestation of formerly mined lands. And talking about collaboration, a lot of the partnerships that we're starting to form are first-time partnerships, whether it's with mining companies, with the Nature Conservancy, even with technology providers. Everyone is interested in finding ways to provide what their company can do, what talents they bring to the table to try and solve a very large global issue. And so when you can show that you're authentically committed to that and that you're embedding this into all parts of your business, I'm finding that people are much more likely to get on board, believe in the project, believe in the initiative, and believe it will succeed. And you start to get success pick up very quickly once you get those first couple of collaborations or partnerships underway.
Maybe I'll add up to that one. Some of the research shows that last year returns on the mining investment were somewhere about 6%, and they were still higher than real estate. And then returns in the last 3 years on average were 13%. It means that the returns are going down. So basically the companies that really are not thinking green and sustainable, they're not gonna get access to the capital because investors are gonna look for these companies that are transparent, they wanna change, and they wanna be sustainable. That's just the reality, that the culture and everything is changing. The investors are changing, the people that shape the world, young people are changing, which is good for us.
I'd be interested, actually, Elizabeth and Gordana, you guys know more about this than I do, but the green finance sort of movement, there's been a whole, right, I mean, whether it's bonds or whatever it might be, that's become a thing, and it's just it's starting to be regulated a little bit, right? And so it seems to me, well, just as an aside, the green and sustainable, let's be green and sustainable, I like to think of that as just being smart. Because sometimes when you hear green or you hear sustainable, you're like, you're thinking about people wearing hemp pants. It's not that. It's much more than that. But I think that there's a lot to be said about being smart so that really smart investors will invest in you. That's a real thing. Am I right about that? It's not my field. But.
Absolutely. I think Ian Pierce said it, that our stakeholders are now our customers. It's no longer Milton Friedman's, and this goes back to what you were saying, Milton Friedman, who said the classic that companies are only responsible to their shareholders. I don't think that holds water anymore. So, yes, you have to be green to be responsible, but this greenwashing thing of just saying, we're green, we're sustainable, for one, the millennials don't buy into that. They're very skeptical. I see that among my students. So you have to really show them the goods. Otherwise, they're not going to put their money there, they're not going to put their energy or their attention there. And that being our next generation of workers, you've already lost the battle.
That's right.
As well as investors, which goes to your point. Yes, we have another question there. Could we have a mic?
I like the question. Tommaso Veneroso, good morning. Well, definitely the digital and the sustainability wheel are the two wheels that I believe that are going to drive the business model of any mine of the future, naturally, is what I gather from the industry and conferences. However, both wheels, the digital and the sustainability, are extremely complex, naturally, for many reasons. Maybe some lack of priority, some lack of focus, some maybe lack of delivering milestones, and so on and so forth. However, I think that the most difficult one is a little bit of an absence of senior leadership in the digital and sustainability strategies, both in formulation and the execution of them. So I was wondering, how can mines prepare to create a new leadership in digital and sustainability strategies?
Well,
Gordana, go.
Yeah.
No, go ahead.
So thank you.
Yeah, please.
So basically, it depends on the vision of the company, and I think across the industry, visions are changing. You know, how you become more efficient and how do you drive more value from everything. And value sometimes is not just the money. You know, it's building all these relationships. There are even, you know, the softwares over there that, you know, record how much have you invested in, you know, First Nations, in your social responsibility. There are softwares out there, believe me, you're free to Google and find them as well. So the different ways to measure that. Sometimes when you say, you know, how do you know how you're doing something? You have to measure. You have to really know what you're doing. And then be present over there. You know, we're talking about the, you know, digital, you know, provide that data. And then talking about the value and all these technologies, the companies have to decide what's the right technology for them. They would have to have some return. You know, just implementing technology for the sake of the technology doesn't really make sense. But also companies recognize that there are some issues that there are not off-the-shelf solutions yet. That's why we go outside to university to research in a community or do research on our own. So Anaconda has been committed to sustainability for years now, and something that we've been doing now a little bit. I'm promoting the company, sorry guys. So it's doing research on tailings repurposing. We've been fortunate enough that tailing sand from our operation in Newfoundland doesn't really contain any deleterious substances. So we've done a lot of research with Memorial University, with College of North Atlantic, and we've been actually planting the different type of the vegetables, you know, potatoes, carrots, lettuce, and we actually been measuring these with the help of the university. So basically, using this as a rock dust, it actually increases, you know, plant yield for 60%. Of course, not all the companies can do this, but perhaps you can separate your waste streams a little bit different and look at a little bit different. As mentioned before, you know, is there any possibility for the aggregates? And then as we do and optimize our mining plants, you know, we know for sure that the minerals are depleting. There are no more on this ground. We're finding that it's a little bit harder to discover the minerals and, you know, bring them up to that level. We've seen some pictures yesterday how you can actually cut that timelines, you know, use the softwares to increase that value and get in production. So basically, you know, we know all these metal prices are changing. So get anything else that could be possibly mineable in the different stockpile. All the mines have all these stockpile management systems where you have high grades, medium grades, low grades. You have some marginals, but then perhaps you should be doing something like submarginal. If half a gram is cut off today, might be 0.2 or 0.3 tomorrow. So there's certain things we should be doing now as we are using all these technology, so the softwares out there in the field to actually separate all these value streams. And at the end of the day, you know, minimize any development, minimize anything, and use all these other suppliers that are, you know, turn to sustainability, like, you know, different trucks that has lower emission, turn to electric. There are different ways that we can use these technologies nowadays to minimize our footprint.
Thank you so much, Gordana. Andy, a final word from you?
I'll just say something very quickly, which is, I think it gets a little bit to your question. Who's coming up, right? We talk about millennials. A lot of folks like to rake them through the coals. I don't. I think of the people who work for me as super smart,
yes,
somewhat more advanced in their thinking about living life, perhaps. They value things differently than a lot of us do. They really don't give a shit about money the way we do, honestly. They care about other things, and those are the people who are going to be running your companies. And so you have to think about, what does that mean in terms of a value proposition, outwardly and inwardly. Last thing I'll say is, every company that's in operation today that's making money is a technology company. The Internet of Things is huge. Getting back to what Gordana said, there is all kinds of tech, there's all kinds of data out there, and that is just going to get more and more important for every mining company to get its hands on. and to really be thoughtful about how to use all that tech, because your competitors are doing it, the government's doing it, NGOs are doing it, and they'll get ahead of you if you let them.
Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Gordana and Andy. And thank you to you for participating. It's been a very interesting session for us as well.